Welcome to the Relationship Recovery Podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way.
Hello and welcome back. Today, Ben Taylor returns to talk about why we get stuck in toxic relationships, or the cycle of toxic relationship after toxic relationship. Ben and I have a deep conversation about the ways in which that we get stuck. We touch on love bombing, trauma bonds, insecurity, the addictive quality, and gaslighting. This is a really important episode if you are wondering if you're in a toxic relationship, if you are trying to understand what to do, or if you're frustrated with yourself because you can't seem to break the cycle. If you are in the place of wondering, how do I do this? I definitely recommend checking out Ben's programs, or you can head over to my website, emotionalabusecoach.com. And if you go down and you see the emotional abuse breakthrough course, we will touch on a lot of the toxic behaviors and start to ungaslight you. Wherever you go in your healing, it's just important that you're showing up for yourself. Whether it's me, whether it's with Ben, whether it's somebody else, you deserve to feel like you can live a life that is for you. Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for talking with me again today.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here.
Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Okay. My name is Ben Taylor. I'm a self-aware narcissist on a bunch of different channels and platforms out there, with the whole goal of bringing awareness about narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships, and awareness of what's actually going on from my standpoint of being a narcissist, and helping people actually see what's going on and how to be able to break free of the trauma bond, the rumination, the toxicity of continuing to cycle back to a toxic person over and over and over again. So kind of like my tagline on some things is that my goal is to help people with awareness, growth, healing, change, and development. So we do this through two stages, really focusing on a healing journey, helping people break out of the trauma bond and the limiting beliefs and the stories they're telling themselves, and then change that to a growth mindset that has them maximize and start to develop and develop into the person that they're called to be, which typically is moving forward out of that toxic relationship towards a new goal, a new version of themselves that they haven't had a chance to see or unlock yet. And so we do that in a variety of different ways. We have like several different programs and things like that, but exclusively like the biggest program that I work with like one-on-one is our Thriver community. That's actually focusing on helping them rewire the stories they believe, like I do every single day. And not just about the toxic relationship. At that point inside there, we're honestly not talking about narcissists that much. It's kind of wild because everybody at that point, we've worked through the trauma bond piece, and they're like maximizing who they are in all four aspects of life that we really like hone in and focus on. So like fitness, relationships, spirituality, and then business. And like that, we've seen some people massively grow, shift, and change even over the past couple of months that we've been constructing and putting all of it together for people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love how you touched on the rewiring of the story, because our topic today of why do I keep getting stuck, or why do I keep choosing toxic partners? A huge component of that is the story that we continuously tell ourselves about why we choose it. Probably a little bit of a victim story, but also probably things that are happening in that relational dynamic that, as if we're aware of, we can see. But when we're not aware of, we might look aside or justify. And so I'm excited to have that thread of the story we tell ourselves in this podcast today, and how we can think about this differently. And so in preparing for our podcast, I made some notes I was thinking about my toxic relationship history and what made me stay in a lot of ways, or like why I kept choosing, or why in retrospect I chose in that time. And the first thing that, as we know, I guess what, like social media, and we see love bombing a lot, but like, I think that when we are attracted to a toxic partnership, we don't realize in those moments that the love bombing feels like genuine connection at the beginning.
hmm
And so I guess if you can unpack for us what you see maybe with your client base of why love bombing feels so good in the beginning.
I think I would kind of focus it in two aspects. Love bombing feels so good because it's giving you everything that you actually want in a relationship. The hard part is a lot of times early on in a toxic relationship, the fact finding part from the toxic person has been, let me figure out all the check boxes I need to check so I become the version that you want me to be so that you actually stay with me or so that I get what I want from you. And so a lot of times when the love bombing is ramping up and when it feels so great, it's because it's giving oftentimes like the storybook, like the Disneyland version of like, oh, this is what love is supposed to be. And there's not a depth to it on the other side. And then as people start to realize and they start to come out of the backside, it produces this giant incongruency in their minds of like, I don't know, the cognitive dissonance, right? Of like, I don't actually know what to believe. And they start to believe in their mind that there's actually two versions of the narcissist, of the toxic person. And that's the hard part, is actually helping them understand that there's not two separate versions. Like people will be like, he was so amazing. He was so loving. He was so kind. And then he turned to be this abusive person that was a jerk to me. And I just want the nice guy back. I just want the nice version back. And the want to latch themselves onto that until they actually start to realize through the facts and through the story they're telling themselves that the person that they actually are seeing now, the abusive one, is actually the real deal. It's actually the actual person, but what they saw before was the mask, was like an alternate version of reality that that person was portraying and coming across to look like in order to make them fall in love with them, in order for them to build a connection quickly, in order for them to lock in that thought process so that they would be with them long term.
Yeah. And then when it starts to change, the story that we usually tell ourselves is that's like, I could get back to that. I like, he's in there. That's the true him, when it's not. And I think that I've worked with a lot of people that had a really hard time untangling that story of that person wasn't real, but this person, the person that I'm getting now, the person that has shown me to be consistent in the last 6 months and wasn't present in the first month, like that 1 month person is not here. He never actually existed. That was the mask. And now
tying it back into like the topic today, like that's oftentimes what makes people revisit that.
Right.
Because, and which is how I normally talk about the trauma bond, hope and potential. Yeah, that's like a big part of it there of like, well, I hope this will come back. I think he has the potential. Let me get back to this. And then it leaves you in this loop of always going back to the same toxic person or always going to a toxic person and positively projecting. So like putting like good qualities on that person when they actually aren't there.
Well, and a lot of people that work with me or that listen to this podcast, they know what a trauma bond is now, but I like the way that you just phrased it around hope and potential, because something else that I was going to mention was around that in a toxic relationship is so inconsistent, right? And I remember like when I was younger, I had no idea what a trauma bond was or what that could be. I remember feeling like, oh, I just need to get him on his good day. But like I was just forming trauma bonds all the time. Can you talk a little bit about that dance between hope and potential and how that fuels the toxic relationship?
Yeah. So there's this study that they did a while back. It's actually in the book, Covert Passive Aggressive Narcissist by Debbie Mirza, where it actually talks about scientists that went through this whole process of testing on, I think it was like chimpanzees, this whole aspect of kind of like Pavlov's theory in one sense. So they would turn on a light and the monkeys would pull a lever and then they get a treat. And they would do that for a long period of time, train them that way. And then they started doing it randomly. They give a treat randomly. They turn the light on randomly. They would give it. They wouldn't give all this kind of stuff. And what they realized is that the monkeys' level of anticipation, just the anticipation leading up to it, rose to such high levels that it was the same as someone being addicted to cocaine. That's what's happening in a toxic narcissistic relationship is you get to the place where you're hoping and you're thinking about this potential that locks you into this concept of maybe it'll happen. Maybe this next time will be the time that he actually cares, that he actually comes home, that he actually loves me. And all these pieces start to play back and forth that make you feel and hope and want, and it produces this addictive quality. And like you see this exemplified in society with like addicted to like gambling or addicted to playing the lottery and even addicted to drugs and like looking after that anticipation of getting back to that first high that they never can get back to. Like all of that piece is that concept of that hope and potential that sells you a lie of like, maybe this will get better. And so when we talk about trauma bond, I normally preface it of like, hey, it's made up of three main things: hope and potential, cognitive dissonance, and then intermittent reinforcement. Those like inconsistencies you're referencing, they're like, those make it super hard to be able to know if this person's actually the real deal or if they're not, or if they love me or if they don't love me, if they care about me, if they don't care about me, if we're together or if we're broken up. And that piece adds to the addictive piece because it becomes like a push pull. When you have a narcissist that is highly back and forth, highly inconsistent, and highly inconsistent about, like, say, the relationship, that's setting you up for a reverse Hoover, for the narcissist to be able to step back and be like, I'm just going to wait for you to come to me because you know that I've always gone back and forth. I've always kept you at bay with this push pull where you're always trying to get into the relationship. You're always trying to apologize for something you didn't do. You're always trying to make amends for something that was my fault. You know, that kind of like back and forth. And so the inconsistency is another piece of the trauma bond, I believe, that actually gets the person to always return, or a lot of times come back because they've been conditioned to feel that way. And then when you tie in that like maybe piece, and then you throw in future fake and the whole 9 yards, like then you have like this entire like toxic addictive like ball in one sense that just keeps you coming back.
Yeah. And like when you're in that ball, it feels like love, right? That feels like, and that's the story that I found myself, like that I would tell myself would be, this is love. If it has to be love. If this isn't love, then what is it? But it was such an unhealthy version of love. And when I had to do my own work to unpack that and figure out why I ended up and why I end up in these kinds of relationships, and it was that's actually what I thought of as normal. Like that push and pull was normal to me. That's what I grew, like the abnormal was normal. That's what I grew up feeling and believing and witnessing and seeing. I remember my coach at the time said, what was a healthy partnership when you were growing up? And I had literally no examples. I didn't even have friends, families. And so I think that when we're stuck in that addiction and it feels like love, it's so hard for us to be able to break out of it and to see like, okay, this isn't healthy. And then I think a lot of people say like, well, I don't know what healthy is. Or that would be too hard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's, I would say a lot of the people that we talk to, it all stems from childhood. It all stems from the trauma. It all stems from like what was normal. And so like a lot of times I'll talk to people and they're like even debating about, do I stay with the narcissist for the kids or do I leave? I'm like, you have to understand the longer that the kids are actually exposed to those tendencies, the tendency for your kids is going to be they're either going to grow up and be codependents to get abused by narcissists, they're going to grow up and become narcissists. Just because like that is how they're formed. They're formed through childhood trauma and they're formed through the things that actually happen. And so oftentimes people get into a toxic relationship and it feels comfortable. And it feels comfortable a lot of times because they think either this is what love is, this is like all I'm worth, you know, all I'm good for because of the stories that they believe based on their childhood or their education or their religious organization or like the things that have stemmed early on in their livelihood that's actually brought them to the place to believe, we normally call them stories, but to believe a lie that's not actually true, but it feels true in the moment because it's getting validated by a toxic person.
Yeah. And reworking that story, it's so difficult to like go and rework all that story and all that patterning, but it's so worth it. How do you help people? If you have people come to you, like even at the beginning actually of this podcast, you were talking about, you know, in your group, like so a lot of times you don't even talk about the narcissist. You talk about like what they're going to do next and like, you know, this new life that they're like writing and creating. What do you think is the hardest part for people when they are almost like they're in the depths of that toxic story before they get to this point of, I get to rewrite a new life now?
I would say two things. One, that there's an actual possibility of a healthy life.
Yeah.
When you're so far in the pit of the anxiety, the stress, the frustration, like that's all you see. And so you think like this is just how life is. And having someone paint another picture of like, it's actually not. Like you actually can get out of this. You actually can heal, grow, and develop. And like when you start to break and shatter the frame that people view that they're being controlled by the narcissist when they actually have the capabilities to rewrite their story, rewire their story into becoming the person that they're actually called to be or like meant to be. Once they can start to see the possibility, then like the second hardest thing, which is the most hardest thing, I would preface it that way, is breaking the trauma bond. And I think the trauma bond is misunderstood by a lot of people, is excused by a lot of people. And frankly, there's a lot of therapists out there that don't have a clue what they're dealing with when it comes to trauma bond. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm saying I'm smarter than a therapist. Heck no, I'm not. I got through school and I was glad to get out of that, and that's it. Okay. But what we actually target and work on is the only way to actually deal with the trauma bond and actually eradicate the trauma bond is truth. Now, how you actually get to the truth, there's multiple ways to do that. We actually specifically hone in on the story that you believe. And so getting down below the surface, understanding that every single day you're constantly triggered by a million different things. In a toxic relationship, times that by 1,000, and you're always getting triggered by that toxic person. How you respond to those triggers will either tell you or sell you a story that you're going to live and ascribe to. Now, that story might be like, you're not good enough. Or like, if I was a better mom, he would have stayed. Or if I would have given him more sex, he would have loved me. Like, there's so many stories, and everyone's story is completely unique to themselves. But being able to go to that story, find it, that's one hard piece of it. But first find the story and then be able to put it on trial and say, look, okay, like let's walk through, like from a logic standpoint, what are the facts that actually prove or deny this story? Like, is it actually true? Like, do you know without a shadow of doubt this is actually true? And then what would this look like if it wasn't true? And be able to actually work through the story that they believe to come up with a brand new story that ultimately replaces it. And that's partly what we focus on, is helping people rewire the story that they believe, because otherwise the emotions kick off, the feelings kick off. It sells another version of reality, it sells another story. So when they believe it, oftentimes it leaves them stuck in the toxicity and the victim mindset, in the place where they don't think they can get out because they don't think they're worth it, or that possibility is even there.
Yeah. And so it's like believing that that story can happen. And when I work with people, I always tell them, like, even if you can envision the full picture, if you could start to imagine parts of your life, moments of your life, being able to do your job without having your phone blowing up and your thoughts in an argument with someone that happened yesterday. Like, imagine being able to get through these tiny moments. Or like, for me, I used to imagine sitting on the beach and being able to be present playing with my kid with sand toys. It was like, that meant the world to me. And it was such a small moment, but that's the only one I could imagine at that point.
Right.
And just like being able to kind of pull together little pieces of that story if the big story doesn't feel possible right now, but to not give up on that.
100%. And that's the part that has people like even dream small, because they're too locked on to either they can't see it, or a lot of times when they start to see it, they still dream small because they don't know how they're going to do it. And that's the piece that we try to even work with inside of our Thriver community, because we're focusing on a lot of their goals, like 3 months, 12 months out kind of a thing. And like, we're focusing on what they want and not how they're going to get it. Because every time a person focuses on, well, like, this is what I want, but I don't know how I'm going to get it, they start to lower their goals, lower their standards, and lower like where they actually want to be 6 months, 12 months down the road. And so like the goal is like, let's tie you to the vision of what you actually want. And then let's actually build a roadmap there, versus being like, oh, let's tie the vision to the roadmap I can already build. If we do that, we're always selling ourselves really short.
Yeah. I think that a lot of it also relates to the fact that most people that are in toxic relationships or relationships with a narcissist are coming in extremely gaslit. They're coming to people like you and me for support, validation, to begin to work through the trauma bonds, to maybe even understand what they're going through. But they are coming from a place of being extremely gaslit, and probably have only started to understand that the relationship was toxic. They most likely had this other person telling them that they were the toxic person.
Right.
I have heard a lot of people say to me this week from their toxic partner that they don't know what the definition of gaslighting is. And so if someone's listening to this and they're wondering if they're in a toxic relationship, can you define or tell us how you define gaslighting and how that would show up in a toxic relationship?
Yeah. So like, one way to be able to describe it would be, gaslighting would be having you doubt the reality that you just saw or experienced. So for the relationship and like the breakdown of the dynamic, like an easy way would be able to say, like, the narcissist or the toxic person just did something. He just kicked the dog, right? And you're like, I can't believe you just kicked the dog. And he looks back at you and he says, no, I didn't. So like, at first glance, it's like, okay, that's a lie, right? So the gaslighting, first off, is lying, period. But then gaslighting is taking it to the next level of where it's like making you question your reality of like, what are you talking about? I would never kick the dog. I love the dog. Why would you even say that I kicked the dog? Like it's taking it to a whole nother level to even make people doubt their current reality. Probably one of the best examples I have of this was a client probably like a year and a half ago that she was having a conversation with her toxic partner in the kitchen and they had like cameras in the house. And he said something that was like super awful and offensive. She was like, I can't believe you just said that. And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't say that. And she was like, yes, you did. You literally just said that. And he was like, no, I didn't. And so she grabbed like the security iPad and like pulled up the camera because it was motion sensitive at that point and played back the recording where he could actually hear him say the words that he said he did not say. And he looked her dead in the face and was like, I didn't say that. I don't know what you're talking about. And like she doubted herself so much. Like she literally had to take the iPad and go to friends and family and like set it down and play it for him and be like, can you tell me what you heard? Because she was doubting her perception, her reality of what she'd experienced because the other person seemed so dead set that her reality was wrong.
Yeah. That is so difficult. It makes it so hard when you have that proof and then be told again, be gaslit again, to actually believe that your intuition is right, that the way that you see the world is correct, and that you can even trust your own truth.
Very much so. So like a big piece of it, like we've kind of danced around a lot of this subject, but like a big piece of like all these pieces around like the gaslighting, the trauma bond, intermittent reinforcement, hope and potential. It all keeps people like cycling, right? Like cycling back and forth with a toxic person in a toxic relationship, which ultimately leaves people a lot of times being like, maybe I'm like cursed. Maybe something's broken with me. Maybe there's an issue. Like, why do I keep like attracting these type of people? And like you have kinds of people that they'll come, they'll be like, I just feel like I see a pattern of like, I've been with a toxic person, then I got out and I was with another toxic person, and I was with another toxic person. Like, do you see that as well? Where it seems like there's like a cycle.
Yeah. And it's usually like, I just keep attracting these people is what they'll say. And I think that there's a lot of like, well, are you looking at why you are attracting that? Are you looking at what you are doing, or when you start to see those red flags in somebody, how you treat that within yourself? And like, are you choosing to stay even though that's happening?
Right.
What is going on within you that is keeping you in that cycle? And is there a resistance to healing in some way? I think that sometimes people come into this work and this may be 10% out of 100 of they just want to be validated, and then they go and they don't do the real, true inner work on themselves to not repeat the cycle.
That's very true. I think one of the misconceptions on social media in general is that people think that narcissists only target certain types of people, right? Like they only go after like empaths or like really good looking people or people with money. And like, while all that is true to some degree, like there's different nuances of it. At the end of the day, I think a big piece that boils down to why people attract narcissists consistently. Now, I've had some pushback on this. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. But I believe for me, what I've seen consistently in talking to clients is typically the people that are attracting a narcissist consistently is someone that actually doesn't know who they are and doesn't have strong boundaries, which is because they don't know who they are. And so that lack of like purpose and direction of like, this is who I am and this is the direction I'm going. And these are the boundaries that actually are keeping me going this direction are typically one of the reasons why a narcissist comes into a person's life and pulls them off of that road, because that person isn't locked into the vision of who they actually want to be. And they're not strong in the boundaries that they actually want to have. Now that could be for a myriad of different reasons why that's happened or why they're that way from childhood, from all the things we kind of touched on earlier. But at the end of the day, like a narcissist is like, let me find someone that I can manipulate or that I can use or I can fill a void so I can actually capture and control and manipulate to what I want them to do. And oftentimes the easiest way is to find people that don't know who they are and who don't have solid boundaries.
Yeah, that's interesting. That made me think of a few things when you said it. So I think I agree with half of what you said. And if I think back, so I had two narcissistic relationships. And I think that for the first one, I wanted to be this person who was like more fluid, more easygoing, didn't jump on everything, wasn't controlling, didn't have all these ideas. Like I always prided myself on like not being someone that is like so, drama focused. But when I look back now, I didn't know who I was. And I just really wanted to be this person. And I allowed a lot of toxic behavior to happen because I didn't want to make a quote unquote big deal out of things.
Mm-hmm.
I had strong boundaries at that point, but not strong enough to push them away. And then the second relationship, and this is where like the 50% agreeance comes in, is that I actually knew who I was, and I said who I was. I remember the day that I met him, I said, I met him like out in the world, which doesn't happen in real life anymore. And he was like, you're like, we were drinking, we were at a bar, and he was like, you're going to come home with me tonight. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm going home. And he was like, no, you're going to come with me. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm a single parent. I'm going home. And he was like, you're a single parent? And I'm like, I'm a single parent. I'm going home. I'm leaving in 10 minutes actually, because my babysitter has to leave. And I completely said who I was. And then like the next date, I was completely myself. And I think he was attracted to me as that person, but could not deal with the fact that like I did know who I was and that I did have boundaries, because I did, but he did everything to shake them. And he did a good job of it. And then I ended up feeling like my boundaries were ridiculous. Like, why do I have to be rigid about this? Or why am I upset when I show up at his, apartment for a date and he's asleep? Like, what's wrong with me for being like this? When it's like, no, the boundary is, we had a time, I'm paying a babysitter. He's not ready. Like I should just go home. But I just think that, but I think like, because I've worked with really self-assured women who do know who they are, but after you are love bombed and like, maybe like, I think it's also true. And I know I feel this. I don't want to speak for other women out there, but I definitely feel like I know who I am and I feel good about what I do, that sometimes men can be intimidated and they don't say that, but they want someone that's a little bit more agreeable. And I have had a few clients say that too. And then I think a narcissist, I sometimes wonder like if they want somebody with that strength, if they're attracted to somebody like with that kind of strength, and then it's almost like it becomes a project to like tear them down. I don't think it's always a conscious project. It becomes so controlling. And then now when this really strong person no longer knows who they are now dependent on this person. So
no, there's definitely different pieces and nuances to that as well. And it kind of depends on the narcissist and the type of narcissist too. Like we run a lot of times into a narcissist that will be with a woman who makes more money than him. Yeah. And then the whole goal after that is, well, here's how it breaks down. It's going to sound probably really stupid, but a narcissist looks, let's say like a narcissist looks at a woman that makes a lot more money than him. And he's like, whoa, like that's pretty cool. Let me be with her, because if I'm with her, then I'll be better. Like I'll have better status. I'll have better money. I'll look better. Then he gets with her and he's like, oh crap. Like I'm still the same person. Like it didn't change anything. Like she still makes more money than me. I'm still the person that's not doing like what I need to do to actually move, grow, and develop. And so like then it's like, okay, well now what do? I got to feed my ego, and my ego's hurting because this person's still making more money and I don't feel any better about being in the relationship. So now I need to belittle and bring the person down. And then in the narcissist mind, it's like, let me bring her down to like my level so that her work life suffers, so that she suffers, all these different types of peace, so that I feel better about myself. Even though if we looked even like on a balance sheet in one sense, I'm still not performing.
I worked with a woman. She met her partner at work. She was one of the top psychiatrists at the hospital. And she and her partner worked like in maintenance or, something that like the facilities in some way. And then he would start like when they got together, she thought he was the best. And then he started controlling her money. And she made 3 times the amount that he did. And he would get mad at her if she went to Target and didn't tell him what she was getting before she got home. And they weren't married. They were just dating. And it was so hard. And that was something that, she was definitely somebody who came to me and was like, I am the strong woman. Like I have excelled in my career. I do not know how I got into this, but this is where it's at, and this is what I need to untangle. I think it can be so hard, but I mean, I think that's like where some of that self-shaming comes in of like, how did I get myself here? And I've been in that cycle too. And I just try and remind people, like, if you're at that point of how did I get myself there? You're right next to, well, how can I get myself out? That's like the next thought. It's like, how do I get myself here? Okay, I'm here, accepting. Now I got to get myself out.
Yeah.
What do you feel about that theory of once you see it, it's your responsibility to start to get yourself out of it?
Can you expound a little bit more just so I kind of see what direction you're
Yeah,
coming from with that?
I have seen this mostly on social media about it's not our fault we got into an abusive relationship, but it's our responsibility once we know to get ourselves out of it. And now I think that sometimes that can be a little shaming to people because they might be so trauma bonded or so stuck and they just are really struggling. But at the same time, I do believe that once we know the signs and we see the signs and we are aware of the signs, it is our responsibility to get ourselves out of it.
Hmm.
And I was just curious what you thought about that too.
I think at the end of the day, like, who else is going to do it?
Yeah.
I mean, that was
Yeah.
kind of like the first thought that I had. I was just kind of curious, like, what direction we were going from that. I don't think it should be something where someone's shaming because, like, I hate it when
No.
people are just like, even therapists, where they'll be like, just leave, you need to dump them, you need to block them. I'm like, that doesn't do anything. Like, it doesn't
Right.
actually help the person at all. I had a client that signed on with us recently, and like, she literally spent like tens of thousands of dollars on therapy. And she's like, I've learned more already, like working here than like what I did in therapy because like, I'm like, I'm not going to tell you just to leave. I'm going to actually like help you work on you and develop like the mindset and the clarity that you need to make the decision that you need to make. Because if
Yeah.
I just tell you to do it, it's not going to last. Like early on in like coaching, I would probably be like, hey, you just need to leave. And I still say that on videos and like live events and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like I never force or try to force a client to do anything because I know it won't last. Like it has to be from them. So there is this piece of like, once you see it, I would say, yes, it is your responsibility, but then it's kind of left in a shame cycle for not careful of someone being like, yes, but how? And then
Mhm.
that's where like you come in like, with all the stuff that you do and try to coach people. Like I come in with like the programs and like how I try to coach people as well. Of like, okay, here's how. Like we have an actual like roadmap. We have a way to be able to move from point A to point B if you actually trust the process, if you actually show up and do the work. And I'm very clear with people before they even sign on to our Thriver community. I'm just like, hey, just so you know, like I'm not here to save you and I'm not going to do the work for you. And they're kind of like, whoa. And I'm like, because like this isn't some quick fix. Like I'm not going to tell you to do this, sprinkle some pixie dust and everything's going to be fixed. Like this is a journey that you have to commit to because you know we can actually get you there. But if you're not willing to trust it, like it's just not going to work. And so
Yeah.
like that whole process is just helping people understand like, hey, we can get you there. Like, but we have to be able to say, this is where you're at. This is where you're going. Now let's work on actually scripting out the day to day so that you can actually achieve the version of you want to be.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, I always tell people like, be honest. Be honest with me, be honest with your coach,
Mm-hmm.
be honest with people because if somebody's coming up to you and they're like, I did this, 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 and this, and then, you think they're doing the work and then they're like behind the scenes, like texting their ex or, they met up or or they're like, oh, but it was just sex. It wasn't it's like, that's a piece of the puzzle, right? And it's a piece of your healing. And
Mm-hmm.
we know the honesty. And if you're doing all this work, but you're slipping, that is okay. Like that you are a human being and healing is not linear. But when you
Mm-hmm.
come and then you cover that up and you don't feel safe being honest, that's really difficult because then we can't meet you where you are and actually help you heal the toxic patterns.
100%. I use a example a lot of times of like a map.
Mhm.
What is that nowadays with GPS? But like I use the idea of like, let's say you have a map and you know the destination of where you want to go, but you've been driving for a period of time. Someone else drove and they got lost and you have no clue. You have no road signs. You have no idea where you actually are on the map. Like that's where we kind of are a lot of times when we're dealing with anybody, like any human in general. Like unless the person's willing to be honest and vulnerable about like, hey, this is actually the stuff that's going on. It's not pretty. I don't like it, but this is where I'm at. Then we can literally like guide them towards the end result. We can help script out a path for them to get to be the version that they want to be. But if there's that block of like, well, like I think I'm over here, or actually I'm kind of over here. Well, actually I'm kind of over here. Well, that's not true. And like sometimes I'll push and kind of press clients a little bit because I'm like, okay, well, like what are the facts? Like what's actually true? And they're like, well, I had a client earlier today. She was like, well, let me take that back. It's actually this way. And then she's like, well, let me take that back. It's actually this way. We got down to the bottom of it. It was completely different than what she thought it actually was. But then that's where she was actually able to start accessing healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's a huge piece to anyone's journey is like any person on the planet is incapable of change if they're not capable of being honest. And
Yeah.
once you open up that door of honesty for anybody, for toxic people, for healthy people, once you open up that door of being honest, it opens up a possibility to actually be able to access how I normally describe it as like another version of you, like the version that you actually want to become. Like there's there's pieces of you right now that you don't like, and there's pieces that you do like. And you're like, okay, how do I feel about those? What do I need to do to grow, change, develop to become the version of the person that actually shows up in a powerful, confident way with certainty and clarity of this is who I actually am or who I'm called to be. And like life is that journey of being able to uncover that. And so the more you're able to be honest of like, this is my current, work of art, and this is current, the painting that I'm trying to get to, like once we're honest with it, then we're able to start actually to help people paint the picture that they're looking to have their life be.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on here today and joining me. I know you have so much going on, but I think that this is really going to be helpful and maybe even just a first step for people that are struggling and they're in toxic relationships or they're in that cycle and they listen to this, they feel validated. And now at least they have some seeds of what to start to do to move forward. You mentioned a few times your Thriver community, and I know we touched on it at the beginning, but I would love if you could tell us how people can find you, but also touch on the Thriver community. And I'll put all the details in the show notes, but just so if someone's ready right now, they can just go on and find you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So really quick, everywhere on all social media, all different platforms. I think we're on like 8 or 9. I don't even know. Raw Motivations. That's where we are, Raw Motivations. And then easiest way to be able to contact me and to start that process, the kind of like application process to move forward, with either working together or into the Thriver community, would be to go to www.rawmotivations.com. We recently just like switched web providers. We have to have the www now. So www.rawmotivations.com, and then click on the one-on-ones. There's actually a form you could fill out there to see if we'd be a good fit to start working together and moving forward. But the stuff we do inside of Thriver is really advanced in helping people. We walk people through depending on where they actually are in life. So for instance, I might have someone that comes to Thriver that is already out of the toxic relationship, already out of the trauma bond, and they're just like, I want to grow. And we're like, perfect, jump right in. And then we have people that are like, I'm stuck in it, but I want to be a part of Thriver as well. And we're like, perfect. And we have them jump in, but we have them go through some of our courses first. And so basically the people that sign on with us and they haven't experienced anything inside of Raw Motivations, we're like, hey, if you're signing on for like a 3-month window that we're working with you, we're actually, adding an extra month on for free and just saying, hey, we're going to actually walk you through making sure you have the basics and you understand how we're going to break the trauma bond to make sure that they actually have the majority of that broken or worked through. So they have a working knowledge of how the process we use every single day of rewiring their mindset works. And then when we do that, we found that it actually, at first I was like, maybe I need to keep it separate, but then we started realizing when we're able to combine someone who's out of the relationship and someone who's like in it right now, but have them walk, in maybe like the same group call and have them walk through an exercise together, is super empowering, because then they're actually seeing other people that are 5 steps, 20 steps, 50 steps before them, or someone who's behind them, all going in the same progression. And that accountability in the community of just everyone showing up real and honest and all of them hunting down like the version of them that they want to be able to achieve in their life is hugely rewarding. It's really awesome to see.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I love how the people that are just starting, they can see where other people have gone, and the people that are past that point are reminded of where they came from. That just sounds like such a wonderful place to be, especially healing from this, something that's so difficult.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's really rewarding to see, that's for sure. And we've got several people that are majorly glowing up in a lot of different aspects of their life and like their spirituality and their business and new relationships. Like it's really cool to be able to see how lives have been transformed and also accelerated. Inside Thriver, we focus a lot of not just the healing part, but then the growth piece, using a lot of the compound effect of like, what are you doing today that's actually putting you towards the version of you that you want to unlock? And in doing that, we had someone inside of Thriver a week ago, and she came on. She was like, the stuff I just accomplished in the past 2 weeks typically would have taken me 2 months. But she's like, I'm not stressed. And like it all worked because she was able to actually hone in who she was, like the direction she was going, and have it match up on a daily basis to be able to move her forward to the version of her that she's trying to unlock. So it's really awesome to see the progression and sometimes the speed that people are able to move forward at a very high rate at times.
Yeah. I totally know what that feels like. Awesome. Well, like I said, thank you so much. I'm sure we will do this again.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Absolutely. Put your links in the show notes so that people can easily find you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah.